would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another YouTube episode of Film Stories with me, Dan Cooper. So, I don't know about you, but I am eagerly anticipating the launch of Glass, which is the third collaboration between Bruce Willis and M. Night Shyamalan, not least because it might be the latest, and perhaps the last, attempt to resurrect Willis's downwards career trajectory, which has kind of descended into a multitude of direct-to-DVD and streaming titles over the last 5 years or so. Working with, if not an auteur, then I suppose at the very least a director with a strong and clear vision has often helped Willis to boost his career profile throughout the years. He collaborated with Tarantino and Pulp Fiction in 1994, and that led, in my opinion, to his most interesting period as an actor. He went on to work with another kind of visionary director, Terry Gilliam, on 12 Monkeys, and then, of course, Luc Besson, The Fifth Element, before he teamed up with M. Night Shyamalan, which was an early film for the director, for the movie that we're going to talk about today, which is The Sixth Sense, in 1999. And all this is really topical with the release of Glass and their latest collaboration on the brink of being released. In fact, it might well be released as this podcast drops. And Willis could really do with a commercial success at the moment, or at least perhaps a meaningful role, at least, in a critical success. And so it bodes well that he's working with M. Night Shyamalan, again, the director who himself has had to also cope with a career downswing, who possibly now seems to be back in the ascendancy himself. It's certainly an intriguing prospect, and I thought it would be fun to mark it with a look back at how their original collaboration, The Sixth Sense, between the two, almost didn't happen, as Willis initially nixed the idea that the director would helm The Sixth Sense. Remember, of course, he wrote it famously too. It seems odd now, I suppose, looking back, that a director who gave Willis's career such a shot in the arm, and may yet do so again, wouldn't have actually got the film if Willis would have had his way. I remember that Simon did a Die Hard episode over on the podcast when he told a story about the power that Bruce Willis wielded in Hollywood, the star status of Willis, and how he used that to very much kind of shape the Die Hard franchise in his pomp. And according to statements made in James B. Stewart's Disney War, the same was very much true here. Even when Willis was in somewhat of a weakened position, he was still very much an alpha player in Hollywood in the 90s. The story in question really begins when David Vogel was put in charge of several of Disney's motion picture labels, including Touchstone and Hollywood Productions, in 1997. Early into his stint, he got Shyamalan's spec script for The Sixth Sense, and this script had been written to sell to studios. He loved it. He wanted it. He saw the massive potential in it, especially as it was leaning towards the more serious, adult-driven content that he wanted to make. Now, New Line Cinema already had the script, and they were also interested, and that put Shyamalan in a position of negotiating power. He himself was coming off the back of 1998 Wide Awake, where he felt that his influence as a director had been negated, he felt, by Harvey Weinstein's decisions at an executive level. And thus, Shyamalan was determined to retain as much control over his project as he could. And therefore, he was holding out for the right to direct the film, and rather than just be the screenwriter. So Vogel at Disney was desperate for the script, and he agreed to a number of concessions, not least to name Shyamalan as director, just to get the film at Disney. Now, his immediate superior, Philip Roth, who was in charge of the entire motion picture output at Disney, he wasn't particularly impressed with Vogel's decision, or with the script, really, and he felt that Vogel's choice to offer these rather significant concessions without consulting him, such as giving Shyamalan the director's chair for the film, he really felt that it undermined by Vogel's decision, but he allowed the deal to go ahead. Willis, in contrast to Shyamalan, wasn't in such a strong situation at the time. I mean, according to lots of reports, his conduct on the set of the rom-com The Broadway Brawler caused an unretrievable shutdown of the film after most of its $28 million budget had already been spent. Cinematographer William Fraker, who was one of a number of people that Willis reportedly fired, claims that Willis was obsessed with close-ups in the production, but that is definitely in the film story for another day. To get himself out of all these pending legal entanglements with Disney for being at the center of a firestorm, which was costing the company tens of millions of dollars, Willis made a deal to sign a 3-movie contract with Disney, the first being Armageddon, which he made for a massively reduced fee. Remember, at this point, his fee was sky high. It was the kind of movie star era of the 90s, yet he made Armageddon for just $2 or $3 million, really to help offset the costs that Disney had lost on the doomed Broadway brawler. So, part of the deal that Willis had with Disney, though, meant that he got first look at all the male lead roles in all of the developmental projects at Disney. And this is how he was alerted to the role of Malcolm Crowe in The Sixth Sense. When Willis's agent contacted Vogel to express his interest, the head of the studio was also told that Willis was interested, he wanted the part, and Shyamalan, of course, would not be directing. It would be fair to say that Vogel and the other execs at Disney were a bit dismayed by this. Not only was Willis already starting up with the same movie star behaviour that he was known for before contracts had even been signed, before he was even in place in the lead role, he was already kind of throwing his weight around, and that wasn't the only reason they were worried, though, because also they were looking to make Sixth Sense on the cheap, and attaching to Willis to this project suddenly would balloon it into the kind of event movie that the company were trying to cut back on. The motion picture arm of Disney at this point had actually lost money for the previous couple of years. It was a result of trying to compete in that increasingly expensive, movie star-driven, effects-heavy blockbuster market that the 90s had become, and that I alluded to earlier. Films like the aforementioned Armageddon came with such a hefty upfront cost, like $140 million for the negative alone, that the House of Mouse were just finding it increasingly difficult to make a profit. Things had really changed since Eisner had taken over Disney years ago, and they'd gone for a kind of what he called the singles and doubles approach, or a small approach to making kind of negligible gains, but lots of them. Instead, they were competing in this huge blockbuster market when the potential for success was huge, but the potential for failure was equally huge. Matters weren't helped for Disney by the fact that animation costs had gone up too, in part because of the loss of Jeffrey Katzenberg to DreamWorks, and the development of their nascent animation division meant that it really was a seller's market, which was driving up employment costs. So Michael Eisner then, who I just mentioned, the CEO of the Walt Disney Corporation, and somebody I've mentioned a couple of times in recent podcasts, he ordered all the Disney movie studios to significantly rein in their costs, and that was to determine two of the major points of interest in what was to happen next. The shooting was delayed into the summer of 1998 because of Willis's schedule. Filming was well underway by then when Vogel got a call from Roger Birnbaum, who was the head of Spyglass Entertainment. Now, if you've watched The Sixth Sense recently, or you've got a particularly good memory, you'll know that Spyglass Entertainment is one of the logos that appears at the start of the film. And that's because Birnbaum informed Vogel that his company had acquired all of the rights, both domestic and international, to The Sixth Sense. Disney had sold the film. Put simply, Disney had sold the film. Vogel was livid, as were the producers, Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy, who'd suddenly been told from nowhere that they were to check all budget overages with this brand new CEO of a company who up until that point had no involvement with the film's development. Roth, Vogel's superior, had effectively sold the film in an attempt to heed Eisner's command to cut costs in the movie-making division. Disney would retain a distribution fee, but it would be peanuts compared to the profits that they would make from the domestic and foreign rights should the film prove to be a success. And of course, that was exactly what came to pass. The Sixth Sense would go on to do incredible business. It would be nominated for 6 Academy Awards and would earn $300 million in the US alone, making it, on paper, the most successful live-action film in Disney's history. If, of course, it wasn't for the fact that they'd sold both the domestic and the international rights. Ultimately, as a result of that, they would keep only about 12% of the profits as the distribution fee, meaning that they more or less covered their costs, but that was about it. Vogel would ultimately leave Disney shortly afterwards, not too long afterwards. He would be disillusioned with both a corporate reshuffle that ended up with him losing influence, and of course he was very unhappy about Roth's decision to sell the film from right under his nose. Shyamalan would go on to make a string of films, each one arguably less acclaimed than the one before. with a few exceptions. Although Split was recently something of a return to form, and the same would be more or less true of Bruce Willis, who, despite going on to work with noted directors occasionally, including a second collaboration with Shyamalan and a collaboration with Wes Anderson in 2012's Moonrise Kingdom, since then, really, Willis has been more or less content just to make less challenging fare. Perhaps with the release of Glass, his first collaboration since Unbreakable with Shyamalan, that could change for both men. And it releases today, so I suppose you can make that decision for yourself. That has been another film story here on the YouTube channel with me, Dan Cooper. Thank you for tuning in and listening. If you want more film stories, of course, you can find information on our website, filmstories.co.uk, and there you can also find links on how to subscribe to Film Stories, the print magazine. Yes, The Jewel in the Crown, the second issue, is winging its way out as we speak to people. You can find more details there. We do urge you to go and have a look. But on top of that, you can listen to Simon's awesome podcasts over all good podcast providers. You can find us on Twitter at Film Stories Pod, and also on Facebook at Film Stories Online. It's been a pleasure.